Dixie's going to kind of take the next little bit and share her story. Dixie and Shane Wise, I have grown to just love them so much. And just every time I hear their story, I am absolutely blessed by it. And just the faithfulness that they have just shown to the Lord in walking through some really, really difficult journey. And it's hard to even understand fully, what they've walked through, unless you've kind of lived a little bit in their shoes. And I can't speak enough of just how thankful I am to have her here, just sharing her story. And there's been some time for question and answer. So if you do have questions and you would like to ask those, you can either put them in the chat box, or we can, when Dixie's done, we'll have time for questions. You can kind of share those then. So Dixie, thank you so much for joining us today. Dixie left work just to be here and spend some time with us today. So made time for us. Dixie, we're very thankful you're able to join us.
It's always a privilege to share our story. I feel like it's a huge blessing because we were once so very lost and thought that we had the truth that we needed to share with everybody in a cult, which is what we were in. And I can speak openly with you guys and call it that. So both Shane and I were 6th generation Mormons on both sides of our family. So clear back, pioneer time. People originally were converted to Mormonism back in the day and came across the plains to establish the Mormon church here in Salt Lake Valley. So we grew up, both of us, in Southeast Idaho, which is considered a suburb of Salt Lake City. If you're out west, then you would understand that. And so we grew up under the shadow of, the mother church down here in Salt Lake, the headquarters. And when we speak of the church, we're talking about the Mormon church. That's part of our culture. Everything about who Shane and I were growing up revolved around the church. The communities, even in Idaho, Southeast Idaho, they were 100% Mormon at the time. There were just such a minute amount of people that were not LDS. And if they were not, then they were what we call Jack Mormons, meaning that they just weren't going to church at the time, but they still identified as Mormons. Or you would have maybe, a certain percent of the population that was Catholic. And that was pretty much it. There was 1 or 2 Christian churches in my town of 75,000 people. There was 1 Methodist church, 1 Catholic church that I knew of, and then there was just Mormon churches. And so from when Bobby's telling you there's just not a huge Christian presence out here, I didn't know a Christian growing up. In my high school, there was 1 Christian girl, and we all knew who she was, and nobody talked to her. She kept to herself pretty much. And what I remember about her is that she just seemed very happy, and we all knew that she loved Jesus. I realize now that I was a little envious of that. I wish I could track her down and apologize to her that she was friendless, being the only Christian at our over 1,000 Mormon person school because of it. But it was enough for her. I find myself being that person now. That is who my kids are now. So it's quite an interesting change. So growing up LDS in that community and being indoctrinated from a very young age, it's things like in the preschool class, them throwing a sheet over all the little 5-year-olds and saying, okay, let's have Timmy come out of the sheet. Now, how does that feel that Timmy's not out? That's what it feels like when someone leaves the church. And so that's the kind of indoctrination things that they start really, really young with you. And I understand why they do it. But they make it so that everything about your life is geared towards just reinforcing being LDS, and that everything about your life depends on it. As a woman, there's some things like, I can't get resurrected without my husband. He's actually the one that's going to pull me from the grave through our celestial marriage. And so if any important prayers are prayed, that's through his priesthood power. Not understanding the priesthood, that was a huge issue for me. And so if an important prayer needed said, a man needed to say it. And that was a very tough lesson for me to learn as we were leaving the church and our daughter's in the hospital, and I'm thinking, oh no, did we make the wrong choice? for our new pastor at the time to tell us, Dixie, you pray over your daughter. I don't need to pray as the pastor. You have just as much power and authority as a believer. And it just rocked my world. I could not process that thought that my prayer would have as much meaning as a man and specifically as a pastor. So it was a great lesson. And so growing up, I knew as a young woman that I was taught all the time that I needed to marry a returned missionary. So the LDS Church has over 80,000 missionaries worldwide, which is astonishing. Part of that, they do a very good job of telling the women, don't marry a person who has not served a mission, because they just kind of tell you, you're not going to have a really strong LDS home, and that will just lead to problems. And that's how they get everybody to serve a mission. It's just this guilt trip. So I married Shane. We're on this track of trying to climb this ladder. And from a little girl, I literally remember waking up every day, just like Bobby said, and saying, I have to be perfect. And I know some Christians will say, well, they felt the same way, but I literally knew like my steps to the celestial kingdom and to becoming a goddess one day, totally blasphemous, depended on me walking perfectly, failing every single day. And I'm talking like, I thought, as an adult woman, like I've never done any major sins. I have been so perfect. Why do I feel so empty? Now I know it's called a God-sized hole in my heart. But I thought I have crossed every T. I have dotted every I. I've climbed every rung. And I feel like God and Jesus are across the Grand Canyon from me. And so I knew there was something missing, but I didn't understand why, because we had tried to walk so perfectly as LDS people. So Shane and I get married. The Lord has planted a Christian here or there in our adult lives that we're watching. And I don't have time to go into those stories, but they're vital. When you guys talk about seed planting, it is literally the truth. And even if it doesn't manifest itself right then, it is being cultivated by God if we'll just open our eyes. And he slowly pried steel scales off of our eyes over the course of 7 years as we started to question. And the catalyst for that was Shane was doing a trade show for work. And there was some Christians that had a booth. This was here in Utah at the trade show. And they just posed some questions to him. They didn't fight with him like we were told that they would. And they just asked him some questions and asked him to do some research. And he did. And that is an awesome thing to do to a Mormon, because once they start researching, it is just slippery slope. They just fall down the hill. So for 7 years, we tried to hold on from that first meeting. I wish we could track them down and say, look what happened, but we can't. So anyways, we did lots of investigating and ended up, Shane finally just realized that there was so much about the church that was false. I tried to stay in the church for a couple months past him. I was leading the women at the time on Sundays. I remember going to church one Sunday. I had prayed a really hard prayer, which was, please let me know if this is true or not, because we're talking total devastation, what it does to you. Not being able to get out of bed, utter depression. Your whole world is shook. How would I tell my parents, my grandparents, knowing that I would be shunned? It is just not anything you want to deal with. And so I didn't want this in my life, but I did pray to ask to let me know the truth about what was going on with my husband. Because I knew when I told our bishop, he would tell me to leave Shane. That's what they usually tell you. The church is starting to change now because a lot of people are starting to leave. But at the time, 8 years ago, I guess we didn't leave 8 years ago. Anyways, so that's what they used to tell you. So I was in church leading the women, and I was convicted standing at the pulpit of something that I was saying was false, that a prophet in the Mormon church was having a conversation up in a temple in northern Utah with Jesus. And I was just convicted, you're telling a lie right now. And I almost just couldn't speak. It was like my mouth was stopped. And so I closed the book, and that was my answer. And I just walked out of the room, and they're all just looking at me like, what's happening right now? I'm not sure that's ever happened before. And I left and went down to the bishop's office and told him I was leaving. And he gave me a priesthood blessing that I did not ask for. It was a very horrible experience for me. He was yelling at me and started to tell me to leave Shane and that Satan had control of me. And I just got up and left his office. And that started our journey of trying to figure out what to do. So long story short, we have no idea what to do. As Bobby said, there's just not a huge Christian presence here. There has not been. There is now getting more and more with people partnering and people planning churches. We had no idea what to do. I sat in bed bawling and just looked at Google, that blank screen, like, what do I even look up? Christian churches, Utah? I had no clue, because we're lied to in our temples and told that pastors and preachers walk with the devil, and that all of the denominations, it's like when Jesus died and the apostles died, they had this mirror and they dropped the mirror and it shattered into 100 pieces. And the Protestants have a piece, and Baptists have a piece, and Catholics have, and so you just think, well, no one has the truth. The Mormon Church had the truth. And so you don't know who to trust or where to go to. And so we just tentatively started going to different churches around Salt Lake, didn't want to be lied to, had no idea what questions to ask. What is the real gospel of Jesus Christ? We have no clue. And we were like little children. We had to relearn everything about who Jesus is, all of it. And I still have some funny things that haunt me. Some Mormon lore that is not true that will come up in Bible studies and stuff. And I feel like, oh gosh, this is so embarrassing, but that's just 40 years of being a Mormon. So anyways, we went on a 6-month journey of trying to get questions answered. I probably asked about grace 20 times. And people were very patient, which you have to be, until we got those questions answered. I had narrowed it down to 2 major questions that I had. And I think they're vital questions that every Mormon has. And that is the need for priesthood and temples. I could not reconcile my life without those things until I got that answered, and I did. That's a whole nother story too, I could share. And once we did, I was able to let go of that. And our whole family, so we have 2 kids, Brendan and Lauren, who are teenagers now, and we were able to give our lives to Christ. We were baptized October of 2015 as a family, which was a beautiful picture. That did come with saying pretty much goodbye to my family for a couple of years. Shane has been able to share the gospel with his family. Most of them have come to Christ, praise God. And he is using us to help other LDS people and answer questions. But I think the biggest hurt of it has been my family and how they just think that we have become so evil by giving our lives to Christ. It's the most ironic thing, and are afraid to be around us and afraid to trust us. And it's just so heartbreaking. So yeah, that's a whole nother thing as well. But yes, that's a long story short. So Bobby, I don't know if there's particular things you'd like me to share. I don't want to over talk either.
You're not over talking. This is great. Dixie, this is perfect. Dixie, can you share just a little bit, and again, I don't know just how much of this audience knows, maybe the inner workings of Mormonism, but would you just share, like, what are the biggest differences? There's a lot we could share here, but the biggest differences between evangelical Christianity and Mormonism?
Gosh, okay. I would say that every major theological point of the 2 is different. So my husband likes to say that what Satan has done with Mormonism is it's his piece de resistance, because there's how many millions of Mormons not going to heaven thinking that they have the truth, because he has taken all of these principles of Christianity and twisted them 1 degree off, so that 10 miles down the road, whatever, you're like so far off the mark that Jesus will say, I never knew you. So things like grace, I didn't understand what grace was, that it's this free gift. It's a completely different thing in Mormonism. It's you do every single thing you can and cross every T and do all of these hurdles, and Jesus kicks in grace after all you can do. It's one of the scriptures in the Book of Mormon. And so it just has twisted it to where you think, well, yeah, we believe in grace. So if Mormons and Christians are talking, you think you're speaking about the same thing, and we are. It's just, it has 2 totally different meanings. So I would definitely say it's things like that. It's who Jesus is. I thought he was one of just our older spirit brothers in heaven, and so was Satan. And so they were literally birthed by Heavenly Father and Heavenly Mother, just like we all were. and they each came up with a plan for salvation in heaven, and we chose Jesus's plan, and it made Satan mad. Stuff like that. That's still, I'm like, no, that's not true. That's Mormonism. It's just very confusing when we talk about the third of the host of heaven leaving. So, I mean, you're right. Like, where do you start? It's every single thing. Let's talk about it. It's twisted. It's just different. It's whatever Joseph Smith and Brigham Young came up with to twist it. Tithing isn't given from your heart. So your salvation depends on it. It's being a full tithe payer. That's why they have billions and billions of dollars.
Yeah, that's a good point Dixie shared. And this is something that you guys may not know, but the LDS Church, if they published all their financial holdings, they would very easily be a Fortune 100 company. So, I mean, largest landholders, I mean, they have buildings and companies and all sorts of things. There was a recent leak that came out, when I say recent, my last year, where the LDS Church has a fund that's supposed to be used for charitable giving, and it has $100 billion in cash and stocks and bonds. And I mean, it's incredible. And, you know, again, this is for charitable giving. Come to find out, this fund is what funded City Creek Mall. If you've been to Salt Lake and you've seen that enormous mall in downtown Salt Lake right across from the temple, that is funded by the LDS Church. They own the whole thing. So they own many, many businesses, lots of places here, which makes Salt Lake City just a unique place all on its own. So government, if you want to get a spot in government, you know, I mean, all that, you have to have the right connections in the LDS Church. I mean, they have a big influence in everything that happens in the state and the city. I mean, Dixie, what would you say to that? I mean, how would you maybe characterize the influence the LDS Church has over every area of life here?
They control every area of life. I've heard of a couple of cults who make you, like, they will tell you where to spend your money and who you can marry and things like that. The LDS Church is just, I feel like it's like a silent killer. Like you are controlled 100% of your life by teachings that are in the church. And so, like, your money is controlled. At the end of the year, we do give our financial statements to the church for tithing settlement. You have a meeting at the end of the year to show what you made. And if you need to settle up your tithing, then you do. And because it's cultural, to your point, everything is cultural. That's just part of the culture. I will be honest with you, I miss some of the culture. It's really hard for me because it was so controlling. I feel like I'm as much of English descent that I am Mormon descent. In fact, our DNA test, when we did the spit test, it says at the bottom with an asterisk, 100% Mormon descent. It's on the DNA testing. And so I can back that up by saying that, but it feels that way too, that they are very controlling. They control your time. They try to make you so busy every night of the week so that you really can't look left or right. And so, yeah, I would say, and like the things with money, they answer everything. Their answer to that last year was, well, when Jesus Christ comes again, he needs this fund to do his work. How is that not charity? And you're like, oh, yes. You know, their answer for everything just trumps your thoughts. Like, you can't think a thought. And so everybody just bows down to that. And so it really does control your entire life. And there have been things like growing up with my mom, they controlled how they would tell you. So again, it's not like you need to have this many kids or you can't have this many more kids, but it is things like you need to have as many kids as possible. And now I realize it's so that you can have as many Mormons as possible. But we were told it's to give birth to all the spirit children in heaven. There was tons of condemnation from my mom because she only had 3 kids. I mean, I remember her crying over it often, but she couldn't afford anymore. And she would just agonize over it. Because Mormon families are big, and I know it's a joke, but they did that on purpose, you know, and so they're just very controlling it that way.
Dixie, can you share more just the pressure that maybe an LDS woman feels? I know you shared a little bit earlier on and share a little bit, now, but just speak more into that. What is it? What do you think the pressure of the LDS woman would face just here in Utah?
Okay, yeah. So you can probably tell from the video, but I'm a little bit of a larger girl. When Shane and I had to move here and relocate from Idaho, I remember I talk about crying a lot. There's a lot of tears shed. I could not fathom moving to Utah. And do you know why? Because I didn't fit the picture perfect model of the perfect wife. It is absolutely Stepford Wives, white picket fence. Everything looks perfect on the outside. And if you have a problem, you do not share it. I was shocked when I went to Christian church and the pastor's like, we're all broken people and we all, have problems. We need to help each other. We just need to be on. And I'm looking around like, I do not know who you're talking about. Like, who is sharing these things? Keep it to yourself. Like, you don't share that you have flaws. And so the Mormon woman, it's not only indoctrination of how you need to be, it's cover every sin up. In our Relief Society, which is the women's group that I taught, the women who are the most perfect. So they also gift roles to the richest people, because you must be being financially blessed if you're wealthy in the Mormon church. That's just part of the culture. So all of the doctors and dentists are the stake presidents. It's just the way that it works. It's really weird. And so they must be the most blessed. And so they're very affluent and they're sitting on the front row. And then there's this way that women talk. We have this certain way that we talk. And I won't do it now because I'm not a comedian, but it's very funny and it's very condescending. If you're a single mom or a single woman, like if you're just not married yet, you can sit in the middle. If you are divorced or you've had, struggles like that, you're back row. You don't get to sit up with everybody else. It's horrible, but it's just part of the culture. You don't deserve to sit up front. You're not celestial material. It's like they're segregating the kingdoms of God in the room. I do remember as a woman, at least once or twice a year, all of the women just sobbing in Relief Society because it would be the lesson, the chastising lesson is what I call it, on plural marriage in heaven, where all of our husbands are going to have multiple wives, as many wives as they want, because even Heavenly Father has Heavenly Mother, but he probably has a bunch of other wives too. And so having polygamy in heaven is going to be commanded. I remember crying to Shane about that. Please don't take other wives. I don't think I can handle it. And he's like, well, if it's a commandment, like I don't want to, it's not like I'll try to get out of it type thing. And that makes men laugh like, yeah, sure you were trying to get out of it. But I remember all the women just devastated, like crying over, we don't want this. And I remember some women saying, I don't want to be sealed to my husband. Like, I don't want to be with him for eternity. That's my eternity. And we would always say, well, why, sister, what's going on? And she could not say, I'm being abused or what was going on. Like, you don't say what's going on. And so just to know, like, the eternity is not Jesus. It's not God. It's your husband. And so that makes it, it just trickles down from there. It's just everything. So the first church I Googled because Shane said, I feel like Jesus is there somewhere. We just got to go find him. And I'm like, okay. So we find some churches and I'm like, let's just go all over the valley, wherever they are, and go try them out. So we go to our first one and there's a band playing. And I had my fingers in my ears. It was so loud. I didn't understand that. I remember I started crying. It was a little offensive to me because I had only come from piano and organ music, right? And so it was just complete culture shock going there. I will say that about halfway through the second song, I took my fingers out of my ears and really started to listen to the words and was bowled over. Shane is a musician, so he was already like, oh my gosh, what even is this? But it was culture shock. And then to this day, for all these years later, every Sunday, hearing the word of God preached and not some themed topic taken out of context and backed up by what a Mormon prophet has said, what church leaders have said, and maybe throwing in a Bible verse here or there and lots of Mormon verses is revolutionary to us. It's like drinking from a fire hydrant. We cannot get enough of it. Just hearing the Bible preached, the word does speak for itself. If you've gone a lifetime without it, every non-believer knows that. It's beautiful. So that culture shock is amazing. Also, the real gospel of Jesus Christ. Knowing that he has a plan for all of us, like I shared, knowing that my prayer is just as important, that it matters as a woman, that he hears me, still just moves me. being taught that. For Shane, I think one of the biggest things was he was a musician all growing up. He plays guitar and drums, and he's a singer. He was all Northwest and choir, and he just didn't understand why God didn't have a place for him with that, why God would put that in his life if he couldn't use it. So when I became Christian, and almost the first Sunday, someone was like, "Wait, you play drums? Our drummer's going to be gone. Can you cover?" And just seeing how God uses him to worship. So using your own gifts, it's like, hey, how are you wired? How is God speaking to you? What? I wasn't asked that for 40 years. It's, we have a need in the nursery and God told me you have to go fill in there. Well, I hate children, so I don't want to be in the nursery. It doesn't matter what, and that's not me. I'm just saying, my sister was called as choir director and she's tone deaf. She's like, I don't know music. Like, what? And so it's just wherever they have a need. And so this is something entirely different, things like that. Being able to say you're broken and to come to people and say, I need help, or I'm in this season of life or whatever, it's just beautiful. They are told that they will be attacked and hated, but some missionaries on their mission have come to Christ. A couple of them have. And so I think that if you can welcome them in and love them and ask them questions, where are you from? And, those types of things. And then get them just asking questions. Can you help me understand this? And even an arm on the shoulder, like, pointing to the Bible, to where it's a very loving thing. It's not a confrontational, you believe this and that's not right and you're going to hell. I mean, obviously, when has that ever worked? But you'd be surprised how many people do that instead of, speak truth and love. And so, again, planting seeds here or there on their mission that they will take home. I'm surprised at how many missionaries come off their mission and say, I started questioning on my mission because some people told me some things. They may not change in that conversation or that day. They wrestle with it at night and they wrestle with it when they come home, and some of them leave the church. So I think it would be good for them to know that they had somebody back on their mission that they could call when they hit that point,
No, that's a great point. And yeah, remember, these are 18, 19-year-old young men, young women, away from home for the first time. They know absolutely no one. And as Dixie said, I mean, a lot of the people who do come to faith in Christ here from Mormonism, you'll hear their stories and they say, I was on my mission. And I had that one sweet lady, one sweet man to just share with me, and the truth. And you could tell that they did it because they loved me. And I've heard that story so many times. And so I think, you think about can you share, even in South Carolina, and loving missionaries is a great way to connect and share the gospel, because that makes an impact here. They're going to come back, and most of them are sent out from Salt Lake City. If they're in South Carolina, they're probably sent from Salt Lake. And so they'll come back one day. And so it would be awesome for them to come back as followers of the real Jesus, right? And can share with their families and connect in churches here. So that's just, I think, one really easy way to connect and share there in South Carolina. Dixie, thank you so much for sharing your story. It's always an encouragement. And I hope just as you continue to go throughout this, just let us know how we can help you guys as you go through this new ministry and how we can serve you in that.